Good evening, everyone. My name is Helen Parr. I work for Devon Wildlife Trust. I'm working on the Green Minds project in Plymouth at the moment. And the Wildlife Trust is a partner on this exciting Plymouth City Council-led project, which is funded by the European Regional Development Fund's Urban Innovative Actions. And that's funded until August this year, unfortunately. It's a 3 or 4 year project and it's coming to its end. But it's a really great opportunity for the Wildlife Trust to bring our expertise and our enthusiasm and experience for wildlife and nature to the green and blue spaces in a large city like Plymouth. So we're doing things like working with community groups to sort of upskill them, to help them monitor and look after the green spaces and patches near where they live. We're working with Plymouth City Council to help create improvements to meadows across the city. And we're helping to set up a community tree nursery at Derriford Community Park. And that's at Poole Farm, which is the council-owned farm at Liam in Plymouth, for those who know the area. And so we're helping to make space for nature while helping local people to reconnect with the natural world and getting all of the physical and mental health benefits that we know this can bring. So you can help take action for wildlife by visiting the Green Minds Plymouth website, greenmindsplymouth.com. And there's still some events going on throughout the remainder of the project. Anyway, on to this evening's talk, which is why you're all here. And we're going to learn all about urban and garden birds, which is quite topical at the moment. I'm waking up in the mornings hearing a lot of bird song at the moment, so I'll be really interested to see this. And our speaker tonight is Jack Rivers from Devon Biodiversity Record Centre, who are part of Devon Wildlife Trust. So without further ado, over to you, Jack.
Thank you very much. Well, hello everyone. Really good to have you all here today. As Helen said, I'm Jack, so I work for the Devon Biodiversity Record Centre. So I'm a bit of a general ecologist. I get to go and help out in a lot of surveys, but I also lead a lot of our community work as well. I'm lucky enough to be involved with the Green Minds project. So as Helen said, we're seeing lots of bird activity now, kind of popping up as the warmer evenings are coming in. And today's talk really is just going to be a bit of a basic introduction to the world of birds, with a particular focus on urban and garden species. Now we'll cover a few other topics, including some of the threats that birds are facing and some of the things that we can do to support them. Now, at the end, there will be time for questions, as Helen said. Anyway, let's get on with it. So birds are a massively diverse group of species, and we know that they've evolved from dinosaurs approximately 150 million years ago. Now, typically, they're all characterized by the presence of feathers, beaks, and the ability to lay hard-shelled eggs. And all of them have a strong yet lightweight skeleton, which is really essential for those that fly. But as you'll most likely know, we do have quite a few birds that don't fly, like the ostrich pictured here. Now, there are approximately 10,000 known species of birds in the world, and these can vary massively in size. So the smallest bird in the world we have is the tiny bee hummingbird, which is about 5.5 centimeters tall, and you can see that there, which will be on your left, I believe. And then our largest bird is the ostrich, which can reach about 2.8 meters. Now, birds occupy a huge variety of habitats, from emperor penguins in the Antarctic to hornbills, which are the birds pictured in the middle, which occupy tropical rainforests throughout Southeast Asia. And as such, they've evolved really different traits to help them survive in their unique environment. Finches, for example, were a big favourite of Darwin's, who used the difference in their beaks to help explain how they'd evolved to target specific foods and niches. So birds have also played a huge role in human history, as for one, they provide a major food source, with chicken being one of the most commonly eaten meats throughout the world. They've also been used to transport messages across war zones. I live in Exeter, and we've got a famous pigeon called Mary, who was really brilliant. She carried lots of messages during the war. And they're also really influential in both art and culture. And currently they provide lots of recreation opportunities, with birding becoming a massive industry and hobby. So what about birds in the UK? Now, we might not have the 10,000 different species throughout the world, but we have around 574 different species, and all of these are unique. And really, they are as spectacular as some of the more characteristic ones found abroad. So as a little comparison, our smallest bird is the goldcrest, which is somewhere between 8.5 and 9.5 centimeters tall. And they weigh about the same as a 5p coin. They're often found in and amongst conifer trees, so your pines and your firs, where they hunt small invertebrates that live in pine cones and in amongst the pine needles. So if you live near any pine trees or other conifers, it's probably a good chance that you might spot them. I know there's a load in Canwoods, that's quite a good area to go spot them. So then there's our largest bird, which is the common crane, which up until 1979 had been extinct for around 400 years, and they are found throughout other parts of Europe. However, their decline in the UK was mostly linked to the draining of wetlands to convert them to agricultural land. However, they have since made a return to Norfolk, where careful protection, reintroductions of the species and habitat restoration projects have resulted in us having now around 160 cranes being found throughout the UK, but there really is that stronghold in Norfolk. Now, there are a whole host of other magnificent species, and there's quite a few migratory ones, which are species that will spend one time in another country and move to another for the reason of finding more preferable climatic conditions. And one of those is the European nightjar, and it's honestly one of my favorite birds. So it spends and actually you can see it in the middle. It spends its winters in sub-Saharan Africa before making its way over to us in the summer. And it tends to utilize our heathland and open habitats to breed. Now, they're incredibly well camouflaged in the day, but they can most easily be recognized by a really unique mating call. Now, sadly, I don't have it with me, so I can't show it to you now, but definitely look it up. It's really distinctive, and you'll most commonly hear it at night. And it's incredibly noisy. And I've heard these calling all throughout Devon in the summer, so definitely keep an ear out. So, like most species, there's a lot of pressures that they're facing as a result of humans, and that's no different for birds. So habitat loss is considered to be one of the main driving factors of biodiversity loss for species throughout the world, with urbanization, intensive agriculture, and forestry being some of the main culprits, just because of the sheer amount of land that they utilize. Just look at the UK landscape, for example, and consider the sheer amount of agricultural land we have. And that's really evident in Devon as well. But not just that, we have so many cities popping up. Well, cities that are already established, but continually expanding. Now, much of this is the result of years of converting habitat, removing hedgerows, and maximizing production in agricultural case. So, in addition to this, the introduction of pesticides and other agrochemicals within agriculture has led to widespread declines in birds throughout the UK and the world. So, as chemicals are consumed by species, they can be passed up the food chain and concentrated. And this is known as bioaccumulation. And in the 1950s and 60s, the use of a chemical known as DDT followed this same pattern and was transported up the food chain by small mammals, which were then fed on by raptors. Now, the thing with DDT is the chemical actually affected the structure of raptor eggs, which led to them becoming incredibly thin. And as a result of that, that led to lots of unsuccessful young and widespread decline in raptors throughout the sort of mid-20th century. Thankfully, these chemicals were banned in the 1980s, but our raptors are still recovering from this to this day. However, evidently, we don't always learn from these things, as quite recently, you may have seen in the news that we're facilitating the use of something called neonicotinoids, which is another really harmful compound. And this compound is actually known to have big impacts on bees. So we know it's going to impact on our invertebrates throughout the UK. But then you also consider what feeds on the invertebrates. So it's likely that this may have an impact on birds as well that may feed upon those invertebrates. Now, moving on from agrochemicals, global warming is another massive issue. So changing weather patterns and changing temperatures and shifting conditions of habitats globally just changes the environment which species need to thrive and survive. And these changes in temperatures render some places completely inhospitable. This is a real issue for migratory birds, which rely on differing seasonal conditions throughout their range to breed over winter and sort of survive in the summer. So if you can't safely reside in one area, that makes it far more difficult to move to the other. And in some cases, they will just die. So with that pressure on habitats, this can lead to a greater concentration of birds within one area or habitat, which can also increase competition. So the competing resources such as food and nesting space, but also that increased contact between birds can lead to further spread of disease. And currently in the UK, we are suffering from a really large wave of avian flu, where contact between birds can prove deadly. Now, take into consideration intensive farming of birds as well, which creates a real hive for disease, and combine it with further pressure on species, and that can produce a really major problem, which can emerge really rapidly over a short amount of time. And finally, there's our own habits. So humans throughout the world hunt birds. In the UK, people still collect eggs and also trade rare species. And although much of it has been made illegal, that doesn't stop people. And actually elsewhere in the world, it's still quite common practice. So for example, turtle doves, one of our most charismatic species, and I've actually never seen one. And that's because they've had massive population declines. And as a migratory bird, they're still hunted on the continent. So there's a lot of human pressure on them. They're also suffering from global warming, which is rendering their sort of migratory habitats inhospitable for them. So how do you actually know what's going on with our birds? Well, there are numerous organisations that monitor the health, populations and distribution of birds throughout the UK. And these include organisations such as the RSPB, which is the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, and the BTO, which is the British Trust for Ornithology. And these organisations are really reliant on volunteers and funding to be able to carry out this work. Now, these organisations, and you can see more of them listed below on this picture, combine efforts to publish something known as the State of UK Birds report. And that's typically released annually, but was last published in 2020, and it previously had a 3-year break before then. Now, currently we know that there are around 83 million breeding pairs of native birds in the UK. However, this is actually 90 million fewer than when monitoring began in the 1960s. So that's a really large decline in the birds in the UK. However, the good news is that this number of birds has remained somewhat stable since 2012, and that follows on from a period of stability which originates in the 1990s. Now, the report is really large, so I've just tried to pull out a few headline figures on certain species, but I would definitely recommend that you go and have a scan through it if you're interested, as it goes into a lot more detail. And if there's any particular species you're interested in, you might be able to find out a bit more about how they're doing in there. So one of the headline comments from this article was that 1/3 of our albatross and petrel species, so really important coastal birds throughout the UK, are actually at risk of global extinction. And despite our best conservation efforts, their numbers are still declining. And this is likely due to pressures from fisheries where bycatch can contribute massively to deaths of birds and other mammalian predators which might target eggs in nests. Now, other trends are quite mixed. So cuckoos, for example, have been shown to be declining in England, but actually they're increasing in Scotland. So swings and roundabouts. And house sparrows have shown a 92% increase in Wales, but have been consistently declining in England. But there is some good news as well. For example, buzzards are now showing widespread increases all throughout the UK. So these trends are then used to inform something that is known as the Red List, or Birds of Conservation Concern, which is essentially a colour-based scale used to identify the level of risk a species faces. So the colour red represents the species of most conservation concern, amber species of moderate conservation concern, and green species of the least conservation concern. And you can easily check where species are on this list on the RSPB's website, or by actually viewing the Red List itself, which you can find online and will likely link to in a follow-up email. Now, interestingly, despite all these losses of habitat throughout the years, as a result of our development, some species have actually adapted to survive and in some cases thrive in our human environments. Often these species are known as generalist species, which means that they can utilize a wide variety of habitats and food sources to survive, and they can therefore occupy our human landscapes. Now, this is a really huge topic in itself, and I'm not going to go into too much detail about this. So instead, I'm just going to try and highlight a few example environments and key species. Now, the UK has a really deep ingrained farming culture, and our landscape is representative of that, with large swathes of agricultural land being present throughout the UK. And for most people, it's agricultural landscape which we most strongly associate with countryside. And that's definitely the case in Devon. When you look out, it's just rolling hills of farmland. It's been around for a long time. Farming in the UK was thought to have developed between 5000 and 450 BC. And this means that many species have had a chance to adapt to these habitats and thrive, even as they've changed over the years. So traditional methods of farming and grazing actually maintain quite a large diversity of conditions and species, which birds could then utilize and feed upon. So, for example, traditionally you might have spring crops, and these provide really ideal early refuge for ground nesting birds such as skylarks and wagtails, and that contributed to providing safe habitat for them in those early months of the year. Now, additionally, the combination of grazing allowed sort of other plant species to thrive amongst grasses, and by also managing a variety of crops, it meant that there was a really nice amount of seeds available to species, and often a really good variety of seeds. And that supported species such as turtle doves. But in addition to that, by having greater diversity, it also supported small mammals within fields and hedgerows, and that provided ample prey for raptors. So even some of our agricultural buildings are essential. So old barns play a really key role in supporting birds, most notably being barn owl, which evidently quite like these habitats. However, other birds such as sparrows, swallows, and starlings will all utilize these structures as well. And in some cases where farmlands managed non-intensively or with wildlife in mind, these species can and do still thrive. However, as previously mentioned, that intensification of agriculture has somewhat shifted the goalposts. And once again, it's putting further pressure on species that have adapted to thrive within those environments. Now, if agriculture is one extreme of human impact on environment, then urban landscape is on another level. So often the parks, trees, and waterways throughout our urban landscape provide really vital refuge for wildlife that's trying to survive. But ultimately, it can often be harsh and inhospitable for a lot of species. but that's for most species. Now, some wildlife actually thrive in urban environments, and the peregrine falcon is one of our most spectacular predators, and it holds the record for being the fastest animal on Earth, and it can reach speeds of over 240 miles per hour, which, to put it in perspective, is faster than most cars, including Lamborghinis, Ferraris, and McLarens, and quite a lot of other flash cars. Now, traditionally, these species were found amongst cliff faces and rocky environments, and you still find them there today. And from there, they could identify prey from a vantage point and quickly dive down to catch the prey. However, they actually came close to extinction as a result of DDT, which was the chemical I previously mentioned, which accumulated amongst the food chain. And that led to their massive declines. Yes, sorry. So that led to their massive declines. And currently, they're still facing quite a lot of disturbance in those environments with things such as quarrying, creating lots of noise, and also disturbing the actual cliffs themselves. And also outdoor pursuits, so things such as hiking, biking, rock climbing, these can all be quite disruptive. So as a result of this, they were really forced to find alternative habitats. And luckily for them, skyscrapers, churches, cathedrals, and even power stations provide fantastic man-made alternatives within the urban landscape. Now, it's likely that they would have used things like churches and cathedrals in the past. However, they weren't as widespread. And as humans have developed, the amount of tall buildings has only increased. Now, you would be right in thinking that nesting habitat alone is not enough to sustain a species, as they also require food. But luckily for them, another generalist species thrives in urban environments, and that would be the humble pigeon. Now, pigeons are widely present and abundant throughout cities, and thanks to an abundance of waste food and nice sheltered habitats such as bridges, pigeons really do thrive in these environments. However, they also happen to be the main prey of the peregrine falcon. So this means that not only do peregrine falcons have an alternative to cliffs within the urban environment, they also have an abundance of their favorite prey. And as a result of this, their populations have steadily increased. And now urban environments provide some of the best opportunities to actually spot these birds in action. Now, one of my favorite birds is the red kite, and it has a similar success story to the peregrine falcons. Now, they're known as being carrion feeders, which means they'll typically feed off of the dead scraps of other animals and leftover kills from other predators. And therefore, they aren't necessarily the best hunters. So they've actually been present in our towns and cities for hundreds of years, and Shakespeare even referred to them as well, in one of his works, referring to London as the city of kites and crows. So they were really valuable at cleaning the streets in medieval times. And at one point, it was actually punishable by death if you were found to have killed a red kite. However, they saw massive declines in their population since the 17th century, as they were deemed to be vermin, and they were kind of incorrectly linked to the killing of game birds. So as carrion feeders, they wouldn't actually be going down and targeting those birds. So as such, they were heavily persecuted and hunted, and the numbers declined. And as those numbers declined, demand for egg collecting increased, which further exacerbated the problem. And at one point, there were only a handful of pairs left in mid Wales around the 1930s. But since then, the populations have increased as a result of reintroductions, protection of nests, and supplementary feeding. And this has meant that they're provided with ample food and enough genetic diversity to allow the populations to stay healthy and survive. So they're now abundant in Wales, Scotland, and even parts of England. And sightings are becoming more common in Devon, and I have actually seen them above the roads in North Devon. So our road systems actually provide both ample opportunity for them, also danger, with roadkill providing a really reliant source of food for them, but also having the risk of collision with cars. but their populations have actually shown continual increase, and therefore it's likely we'll be seeing quite a lot more of them in the future. Now, often overlooked in the landscape is our gardens, which provide a whole host of different environments and opportunities for birds to utilise. So differing styles of gardens will favour different birds, and their location in amongst roads and urban areas provide really vital stepping stones across our country, which is really useful for species such as migratory birds, which may need somewhere to rest during their journey. So trees and hedgerows within gardens provide great opportunities for nesting and breeding, but they also provide a really useful vantage point for identifying potential predators and threats. But also, if you're a predatory species, you might more easily be able to identify small mammals. Sheds, porches, and other structures also provide safe areas for nesting, and these most notably support species such as swifts and sparrows. And then things such as vegetable beds, flowers and lawns can provide really great habitats for insects, but also provide lots of food in the form of seeds, which birds can also feed on. And the other great things about gardens is they're quite easy to adapt to support specific wildlife, but you can also manage them in a more general way to support a whole variety of birds and wildlife. Now, as gardens provide bit of a bastion for birds, they're also providing ample opportunity for a bit of science. So the RSPB runs something annually known as Big Garden Bird Watch, which encourages people to go outside and observe birds within their garden for a set amount of time. And this is conducted all throughout the country, and anyone can get involved. Now, sadly, this is just passed, so you can't get involved this year, and we don't have the results yet, but it's something you could get involved in the future next year. But even though we don't have this year's results, we do have last year's results, and that gives us a really good idea of most common birds within the UK, and actually the most common birds that you're likely to see within your garden. So in 10th place is the great tit, and this can be seen all year round, and it's really quite a feisty bird, and you can often see it fighting off other birds around a feeder to make sure it can get its food in. And it has a really distinctive call, which I think sounds a bit like a bicycle tire being pumped up. So you can go listen to a lot of calls on the RSPB website. And yeah, I recommend doing it, as once you recognize this one, you'll recognize it all over the place. It also has really distinctive green and yellow plumage, and it has quite a dark black head. And it can often be found in amongst other tits, which will sort of congregate together in the winter in groups to feed and move about. Now, in 9th place was the magpie, and it's got really beautiful kind of purpley blue iridescent wing feathers, and it has a bit of a glossy green tail and obviously kind of white all throughout. They really are a true generalist species that will scavenge and hunt for food. And they're really quite confident and almost arrogant, and which means people often don't look too favourably upon them. However, I do really think that they're one of the best birds we have. I really like corvids, which are any of your birds, including crows, magpies, and rooks. And they're some of our most intelligent animals. And there's kind of some studies that show that they have the ability to memorize faces. So do be kind to them. And also there are some links that maybe they teach their young faces as well. They've seen generations targeting people that weren't necessarily kind to them. Then in 8th place was the chaffinch. So male chaffinches have really distinct kind of beautiful red underside with white flashes on the wing. And they can often be found hopping underneath hedges or bird tables and feeders, as they tend not to like eating out in the open. Now, the females are somewhat duller in colour, but they are still quite easily identifiable. So their calls are a little bit more difficult to identify as they vary them quite a bit. However, once you get your ear in, you can recognise them, and you will start noticing them all over the place. Next, in 7th place, is another finch, and that's the goldfinch, and no points for guessing how it got its name. So they have this really distinctive yellow flash on their wing, nice red face, and they're a migratory bird which migrates to Spain in the winter, and they can be seen in small colonies all throughout the UK. So as mentioned before, finches really were one of the favoured species of Darwin, who highlighted the difference in beak shapes to help describe his theory of evolution. And it's no different with these birds, as their sort of long, thin beaks help them pick out the seeds from thistles. However, they are known to be visiting feeders quite a lot, and that's probably why they're quite high up in this list of garden birds. So in sixth place is the robin. Now, I'm going to assume that most of you know them, as they're really deep ingrained in our culture, and they can be found on Christmas cards all year round. However, they're not as nice as they seem, as they're incredibly territorial, and they can be really quite aggressive when it comes to competition. So they're maybe not as cute as they seem. And typically they'll feed on a wide variety of food sources. So another generalist species, including worms, seeds, vertebrates, insects, and other fruit. The fifth most common bird is the blackbird. Males are this really deep dark black color, often with, well, not often with, they always have an orange beak and a yellow ring around the eye, whereas the females are more of a dark brown and often have a sort of mottled, streaky tone to their breast. They have a really distinctive song, and it's lower than most of the garden birds, so you can often distinguish it amongst the chorus of birds. And it was described to me once as being quite a plumbing tone, if that means anything to you, but that's stuck with me and that's how I remember it. And now we're getting into the big hitters now, the top four. So in fourth place, there's the wood pigeon, and it's our largest and most common pigeon. But it's now actually under moderate threat, so it's amber on that list I was talking about. It has a really distinctive array of colours throughout its feathers, and its call is quite distinctive. It makes that really loud cooing sound. In addition to that, it makes an incredibly loud amount of noise when flapping its wings. So you can often hear it if you startle it in the woods or a tree, and often you'll hear it before you see it. And they breed prolifically, and they'll breed all throughout the year. So they will probably lay eggs throughout most of the year. And in the winter, it's quite easy to spot their nests, and they're easy to identify because they put very little effort into it, and will literally just pile a few sticks together and call that a nest. In third place is the starling, which from a distance often looks sort of dark brown, not too interesting. Once you get up close to it, its plumage has a real array of colours, which are almost iridescent. Now it's often seen in large flocks, which form patterns in the sky, and this is known as a murmuration. And these often occur around sunset, and they can really be fantastic to watch. I went to university in Aberystwyth in Wales on the coast, and there's one of the largest sort of groupings of them underneath the pier there, so you can watch them from the beach most evenings. And we're not entirely sure why they do these murmurations. There's a few theories. One of them is that it's to ward off predators. So if you're in amongst a group and you're in the center, you're less likely to be targeted, or if you're looking big and scary with a big murmuration. Some people think it's to share information. So if you found a good feeding spot or a nice sheltered area, or even it might just be a way to gather together at night to congregate and huddle together and keep warm when they're actually settling down. And then in second place is blue tit. It's really distinctive. It's got this really vibrant blue and yellow green plumage. I think, yeah, a little bit of white on the face. And then once again, that can be found in amongst groups of other tits in the winter. And they're one of the most frequent birds found actually utilizing bird feeders. And then in first place is the house sparrow. Now, despite being the sort of most recorded garden bird in this big garden bird watch, it's actually on the red list for conservation concern. And its numbers have been continually decreasing in England in particular. Its numbers have dropped its numbers have dropped 71% between 1977 and 2008. And that's substantial declines in both urban and rural populations. And when I was looking into this, I couldn't really find any clear reason why. But luckily, in places like Wales, Scotland, the numbers do seem to be increasing again. Now, I just thought I'd pull out a few other examples from the Big Garden Birdwatch, which I thought were interesting, and also just highlight the sort of array of birds you might be able to spot in your garden. So in Plymouth, I'm sure you'll have seen herring gulls. They're really common around the coast. But actually, these are another species that are on the red list. So they've been showing massive declines. So they might be a nuisance, but they're not doing too well. And yeah, so they were in 24th place. You've also got in 21st place the greater spotted woodpecker. These are just incredibly beautiful birds, and you can often hear them tapping away on wood. Interestingly, in 31st place was the ring-necked parakeet. So these are actually really widespread throughout London, where pets have escaped and kind of grouped together and continued breeding, and they are actually present in Plymouth as well. So you might be lucky enough to spot them. Then you've got the sparrowhawk, which is a really charismatic predator, and often you'll find people posting about them because they've gone for a pigeon in their garden. So if you find an exploded pigeon, it could be a result of a sparrowhawk. Horny owl, another really charismatic nocturnal species. They've got a really distinctive, almost classic twitcheroo type call, but the females make quite a large screeching sound. And then another one of my favourite birds, which I just thought was quite interesting to see on the list, was the lapwing. And they're typically sort of wetland species, kind of like bits of open grassland near a river. So potentially someone with a nice garden. But yeah. So how can you actually help get birds in your garden? So nest boxes provide an alternative to kind of natural holes in trees that they might find in their environments. And you can place nest boxes at different heights to support different bird species. So things like the shape of the bird box, the size of the bird box, and the size of the holes can actually help distinguish between which species will use them. So you can also utilize something called a swift brick, which is essentially a brick that you put into your house, which is designed to allow swifts and swallows to use it as well. So if you are going to be putting up bird boxes, I recommend looking at the RSPB website. They have a really good section which will actually break down which bird boxes are good for which species of birds. It's quite a lot to include, so I've not included it, but there is really good sort of resource there to look at. But some of the important things, if you are considering putting up bird boxes, is that they should be cleaned out, but they should be done in the autumn. So from September onwards to avoid kind of any breeding birds. And you shouldn't use anything like insecticides or powders. But actually, if you do leave them up over the winter, things such as small mammals might also use them to hibernate, and some birds may still be in there. So yeah, but definitely if you're going to take them down, do check for any birds beforehand, as it is illegal to disturb or harm any nesting birds. And so if there are any signs, best kind of leave it where it is. Also, bird boxes can lead to conflicts with predators. So be careful when sort of placing them. So make sure it's not in an easy location for things like squirrels or cats to target. And so sort of placing them above brambles or kind of in amongst any kind of shrubs where birds might be able to get through, but other larger species might not be, then that's kind of good area to put them. So one of the most common ways to support birds is through feeding. And they're actually a really good way to attract birds to your garden if you want to spot them. Now, once again, different seeds will attract different birds. However, there are a really good variety of natural seed mixes available. And once again, if you want to target specific species, then do check the sort of RSPB guidelines. And there are other sites as well that will recommend sort of natural seeds. However, you should avoid any seed mixtures that have things such as split peas, beans, dried rice, and lentils, as only large species can eat them dry as they will expand in the stomach. And these things are often added to cheaper seed mixes, bulk them out. Also, you should avoid any mixtures that contain weird sort of green or pink lump, as these can be sort of broken bits of dog biscuit that are also included, and they can only really be eaten when they're soaked. So another food source is fat balls, and they're really useful in the winter when there's kind of not as much food around. So sort of high calorie food is a good thing. And it is really quite easy to make your own using melted fats and mixing that with seeds and fruit. However, be careful when using these and don't use them in the summer as they will go rancid when it's warm. So avoid using them at that time of year. So bird feeders, one thing. There's also feeding tables, and these will support different species. So depending on why you're feeding birds, you'll want to choose your feeder based on that. But a combination is often a good way to support multiple species of birds. But one of the main things with using any kind of feeder is making sure that the areas around the feeder and the feeder itself are kept as clean and hygienic as possible. And this is really important at the moment, especially with the prevalence of avian flu. So ways to do that are keeping an eye on how long it takes for food to get cleared up by birds. So if it's been sitting there for a while, get rid of it and avoid leaving food on the ground and kind of in low down places as species such as rodents can actually target it and spread disease. So definitely regularly clean your feeders with around sort of 5% disinfectant solution and move feeders to new areas around once a month to avoid kind of bird dropping and accumulating. But also it's important for yourself to make sure you clean them outside, wear gloves, and sort of prevent any contamination in your own household or to yourself. So often overlooked is water, and water is a really fantastic way to support birds, particularly in hot months where it may be difficult to find water. However, water can also be a massive vector for disease. Therefore, any water table or feeder should kind of be emptied at the end of the day and then topped up, but also regularly cleaning those as well. So birds need water for drinking and bathing. And it's also particularly important over the winter when natural supplies of water might be frozen, just as important as kind of sources being dry in the summer. So birds actually don't have sweat glands, so they need less water than mammals. However, they do lose lots of water through respiration and in their dropping. Most small birds need to drink around twice a day to replace that water that's lost. So really important to have a good source of water. But yeah, some species do actually get the liquid they need through food. So things like fruit can often be used. And other species like insectivorous birds, which feed off of insects, get most of their water from food. But yeah, other sources of water might include something like a small pond or a stream. So other sort of wildlife features of your garden can also have benefits for birds. And finally, another way to support birds is just having a wild garden. So maintaining sort of nice, diverse hedgerows can provide lots of opportunity for food. So things like blackthorn, hawthorn, the berries that they produce, well, or not berries technically in some of them, but the fruit that they produce can be a really useful food source, but they also provide really good nesting opportunities and also protection from predators. Things such as trees in your garden as well, once again, will provide food, also those like nesting opportunities, vantage points for kind of defense against predators, but also for the predators themselves, target species. By actually encouraging wildflowers that can provide a greater diversity of seeds within your garden, which once again will support more birds. And the more wildflowers you have, the more kind of environments in your garden, the more invertebrates you'll have overall. And that's massively beneficial as a food source for birds as well. And not just invertebrates, things like mammals and reptiles will also thrive in wild gardens. And so it's just important for all wildlife, really. And actually, by kind of having denser hedgerows, kind of more trees, you end up providing more shelter. And that can be beneficial in amongst things like sheds and other kind of man-made features within gardens. And as mentioned previously, things such as wildlife ponds have the benefit of providing water, good space for insects, but also vegetation. So Wilder Gardens really can offer more opportunities for birds, and therefore they can support a greater diversity of birds. And by not necessarily targeting any species, you may actually benefit more by contributing to a more diverse ecosystem, which more species can utilize. So another way that you can help birds is through citizen science and monitoring. Now, I've mentioned the Big Garden Bird Watch before, which you can do every year, and that really does help support the RSPB and ongoing science. Now, I work for Devon Biodiversity Record Centre, and we also collate records from throughout Devon, and those will feed into the work that the Wildlife Trust does. It'll help kind of identify areas of particular interest, protect against things like planning, and any other sort of ongoing scientific research from the county. So really good to send your records into us, and I'll go through how to do that in a little bit. But then there's also other organisations such as BTO and local groups such as Devon Birds. And these groups, such as Devon Birds, can be a really good way to actually learn more about birds and get in contact with local experts and other enthusiasts. And actually, it's volunteers which are really vital for sort of helping these organisations tick and actually making sure that research projects are successful. So how can you actually identify birds? So one of the main things is through sight. So things such as binoculars can be useful for seeing birds that are far away, but kind of some of the larger species and kind of less scared is the wrong word, but species that you're able to get up close to, you don't necessarily need binoculars. So head out with a local group. People like the Wildlife Trust also run birding walk. I believe we did one in Saltram recently. But other things such as social media will have groups where you can actually discuss birds and they'll help you identify them. So identification books are really fantastic. You can pick them up in most charity shops. I've picked up a few, and these are a great port of call if you're just trying to go it alone, really. And so if you're going out birding, always useful to have one of those in your pocket. So there's now actually apps as well, which can help identify birds through their calls if you set them recording. But then they can also give you keys to help identify birds. So if you don't have a book, download an app and keep it in your pocket. But actually, trying to learn some of the calls is really essential, as often you'll hear birds before you see them, and that can help lead you to where they are. So looking on things like YouTube and the RSPB website can be a really good way to learn about your bird calls. So if you are going to record birds, the main things you need to sort of note down is who you are and your contact details in case somebody needs to verify the record with you. What did you see? So the species of bird, where it was, so that's usually a grid reference, what 3 words or a description of the location, when it was recorded, and then any other notes such as the abundance, so were there other birds around, the life stage, was it an adult, sex, you can identify it as a male or a female, and then what the general conditions were like, and then you might not be doing a strict survey, but it might be anecdotal, but you would want to discuss the survey method. And then if you can get photos, that's really great to help identify birds. So how can you actually submit records if you want to do it? So the DBRC has a website, and you can either submit individual records on the web page, or we do have a downloadable spreadsheet, which you can then email into us if you want to record multiple species over the year. There are also apps such as iRecord, iNaturalist, and I believe BTO have their own app. And these are sort of areas where you could record species and share it to a wider network. And you can also see other things that other people have recorded. Often things like BTO will then feed their records back to the DBRC. And then there is also organisations like the RSPB, which will also take in your records, but also you can contribute to things such as Big Garden Bird Watch. So, summarise really, the UK has a massive diversity of birds, and so there's lots to learn, lots to see. They utilise a really wide range of habitats throughout the UK, but actually you can see a whole variety of birds within your garden and urban environment, and often they're some of the more charismatic and interesting species. But actually, birds are facing multiple threats, whether that's agriculture, urbanization, persecution, or climate change. And that just makes it all the more important to try and support them within your local area. Also, help contribute to research through volunteering and monitoring birds. And also, if you're just interested in birding, it's just fantastic to get out. And actually, in Plymouth, you're in a really fantastic place. You've got coastal birds, you're not far from Dartmoor to see some more birds. And there's some really great spots such as Saltram, you have Wembury, and also Worley Point, I believe. But we'll send some of those recommendations out to you in a follow-up email tomorrow. But that's all from me. If you've got any questions, now's a good time.
Thanks, Jack. That was brilliant. So we didn't have many questions. There's one's actually has come in, but if people have got anything they'd like to ask, please do. But if Jack's covered everything, that's absolutely fine. Or even any feedback about the talk. But I'll just ask this question that has come in. With birds migrating to the British Isles in spring, are we about to see a big increase in or influx of bird flu?
I'm not entirely sure. I'm not sure of its sort of status elsewhere, really. But it's already quite prevalent at the moment. So yeah, it's already here. It has the potential to get worse, but we don't really know if that happens.
I think that's what I've heard, is that there's like so many cases around the UK, and it has sort of decimated some wild populations, but also some domestic sort of birds as well, chickens. And I mean, I don't know about other people, but anecdotally, just walking around where I live, my village, I have seen a lot of dead pigeons sort of in the verges. It's a lot more than I've ever remembered seeing before. So I was wondering if there have been, you know, maybe some local outbreaks around here, but it is a big concern. But as Jack said, we will put together an email, a follow-up email with some of those links and ways that you can get involved. So if you didn't remember it or manage to write it all down, we will send that around to everybody who signed up and for tonight's talk. And we've got some other links that I can send you, which from the Wildlife Trust, which is about sort of wildlife gardening, how you can do wildlife friendly gardening, our Action for Insects campaign, which is a really good campaign. I mean, it's interesting when you mentioned, Jack, about the sort of 60% of decline, or whatever it was, 67% of sparrows, and it does mirror the massive declines that we've seen in insect numbers. So I'm sure that's, you know, if there's not enough food around, as much food, there's not going to be as many birds. So by helping insects in our own gardens, we're automatically going to help things like birds, and also bats. Bird food, I don't know if I'm allowed to promote a bird feed producer, but there is a company called Vinehouse Farm, and they do donate a proportion of their profits to the wildlife trusts nationally. So if that's something you'd like to support, then I've bought, often I buy the sunflower hearts. I find it are really good for feeding the birds, as a good sort of all-purpose thing to feed them on. So yeah, that's a good thing to do. Okay, and then the person who asked about bird food have said they've seen dead swans, actually, which is not very nice. Yeah, and yes, someone else is saying the email links will be helpful, so we'll get those out to people. I mean, I've been noticing birds in my garden collecting nesting material already, and they've been checking out the bird box in our apple tree. So I hope we don't get too many cold snaps now between now and they'll start to nesting and breeding, I guess, quite soon. It's quite mild, isn't it? So yeah, so thanks. If there's no more questions, thank you all for coming along. and it's another great talk. Oh, I was going to say we've got the final talk in our sort of winter webinars that Jack's going to be giving. This one is a talk called A Tremendous Life, and it's all about trees, and so that's on the 15th of March. You can find that on Eventbrite, or we'll pop that into the follow-up. I'll try and remember to pop that into the follow-up email as well. So yeah, once again, thank you very much, Jack, and thanks everybody for coming, and good evening.